Hey, let's paint some wreaths on some recycled paper bags or any surface that you want. But I just happen to have dozens of paper bags that I've been hoarding for this kind of project. So that's what I'll be using today. You'll also need a variety of paintbrushes. I prefer, when it comes to detail painting, a nice pointy brush like this. You'll need a palette or a surface to hold your paint. If you don't have a palette, a sheet of newspaper would work, and then some craft store acrylic paint. First thing I did was I got all of my bags out and then I just started covering them with different colors of paint. To do that, I just squirted some paint on the surface and then spread it around with a nice wide brush. I wasn't really going for a crisp edge. I kind of wanted it to look a little bit more organic. So you can see here, I'm just kind of making a general shape of a square and leaving those edges kind of brushy and rough. Totally up to you. Here's some tips though. If you put a little bit too much paint on your bag, to get some of the paint off of there so it doesn't cause your bag to wrinkle and take forever to dry, get another bag, lay it on top, and do something called pulling a print. That'll remove some of the excess paint and get you started on your next bag. Try a variety of different shapes like circles and rectangles, and I wasn't even really cleaning my brush in between so that I had kind of like a mixture of colors and not just one solid color. Most of all, as you're doing this, have fun and enjoy the process. If you're doing this with kids, then they can just crank out tons of these bags, and then later it will give them a surface to paint on. So once you've got this done, it's important to let these dry almost thoroughly, but it's acrylic paint, so the good news is it does dry pretty quickly. But if you're using acrylic paint with kids, make sure they wear some sort of apron. It doesn't wash out of clothes. All right, now once it's dry, I'm going to start with a round one and a piece of chalk. You could trace a plate to give yourself a nice circle. Flip a plate upside down to trace it. I like to use chalk, but a pencil would work just fine. The reason I use chalk is that with a napkin or a towel, it's easy to erase. Now I'm loading up my palette with a variety of green paints. Next up, let's just start painting. So on that circle, which I know you can just barely see here, you're going to just slap some of that paint around the edge of the circle, and I'm using my round pointed brush. Don't worry about it looking pretty or perfect or just right. You're just trying to kind of fill it in. Plants and foliage, they all look different. They're just like us. Everything is different, different shapes, different colors, different sizes. So keep that in mind. Your main goal here is just to kind of fill this in with a bunch of different brush strokes. I'm using a variety of dark green and light. So next up, let's draw a skinny line like this, and then short little lines down the edges. If you're uncertain about how to go about painting this, grab a piece of newspaper and practice a couple of times, but really don't sweat it too much. Just paint it on there. You'll get better and better as you get more of these little branches. I would call these pine needle branches on your wreath. So you're using just a long straight line and then short little lines going down the edges. And I'm using my brush very lightly to create a thinner line. When I was making those thicker lines, I was pressing my brush all the way down on the surface of the paper. So for thinner lines, paint lightly. For those thicker lines, go ahead and press your brush down all the way. All right, so I'm starting to fill this in a little bit. When it comes time to change color, you might want to clean your brush off a little bit, but I don't really like cleaning my brush off too much because I like to mix those different kinds of greens together. What you're doing now is you're looking for any of those empty spots. I've switched to a lighter color, and now I'm using the same brush, but this time I'm just making little dots around, and that's helping me fill in any of those empty spots that I might have. So looking around, I'm just adding those little dots of color. This not only gives me a variety of color, but it also gives me a variety of shapes. Now with that kind of bright green, I'm doing that same brush stroke that I did earlier. What I did find though was that sometimes my acrylic paint was a little bit too thick to paint with. It didn't have a lot of movement or something called viscosity. So to give it that, I was adding a little bit of water and mixing that in with the paint. It does dilute the color a little bit, making it a little bit transparent, but it does help it move a little bit more on the surface. So keep that in mind. If you're looking to paint some of these branches and the paint's just not moving for you, try adding a little bit of water. All right, so now my wreath is looking really filled in, and I think it's about time to let it dry after I look for just a couple more spots. To me, you can't add too much. Just try to leave the middle a little bit empty so it keeps that wreath-like look. Now, I do have a little bit of green paint left on my palette, so I'm going to add a little bit of water to that paint. You can see me blending it here, and I'm going to use this extra paint to do some splattering onto my paper. Be careful with this because you want to flick downward. You don't want the paint to fly up and get on you, so I'm flicking it downward, or you can load up the paint with paintbrush with some water and some paint and then just tap the back of it, and then that will help splatter around the edges. I just feel like this adds a little bit more interest to the painting. If you don't like the way this looks, then you do you. All right, quick review. Draw a circle, and then you're going to grab your greens and then just have at it with your paintbrush going all the way around the edges. Switch it up a little bit with different colors, different brush marks to continue filling it in. I really wasn't sure about painting on this dark blue background, but this one ended up being one of my favorites. Make sure you really fill it all in so you don't have any of those empty spots or white, and splatter paint if you want to. All right, now that it's dried, let's go ahead and create a bow. I'm using a smaller brush so I can draw with it. You could draw with a piece of chalk first if you wanted to. That way you could erase if you liked. Draw a circle with 2 lines coming up and away at the top for the top of the bow. It should look like a little bit of a bird flying towards you. Draw 2 kind of curved lines coming down. Imagine that curved shape of the side of a bow. And then you're going to connect or bring that back up to the circle. Very easy, but again, if you're not really sure if I'm going too fast, you could always practice painting this on a piece of newspaper, or like I said, draw with chalk first. I'm going to draw 2 kind of curved lines coming down and connect them with an angle line, like a capital A, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side. Once that's complete, I'm going to fill in my whole bow with a little bit of this light pink. I don't know why I was using such a teeny tiny brush to paint and fill that in with. I eventually switched to a larger brush, but I'm just filling all of this in, and I like to paint thickly because I like the texture that it shows, kind of makes everything look a little bit more painterly. Once that's complete, I'm not even going to let it dry before switching to another color and drawing some stripes. You could do polka dots, any kind of design you wanted to. And I like doing this while it's wet because, again, it gives it that more painterly look. I'm not going for perfection. I'm just going for a kind of fun, whimsical look with my painting. And I'm also using the darker color to outline the bow. I'm going to add some more stripes on either side, but again, you could do polka dots. You could do a thicker kind of stripe, any kind of design that you wanted, or just leave it plain. You could totally do that too. Now, when you're finished, because I absolutely cannot bear to have paint sitting on my palette, here's a couple of ideas for you. If you're finished painting for the day and you still have some acrylic paint sitting on your palette, you could do a couple of things. Use that for splattering. You could also use that extra paint to paint more bags. So don't let that paint just dry out and go to waste on your palette. You could use it in a variety of different ways, and that'll also help you clean up your palette a little bit. Or you could use it to make some dots for the berries on your wreath. So I'm using a kind of thick paint on here, and the reason being is because this red wasn't super opaque. I really didn't want the wreath to show through, so I'm layering it on there thickly. And then with my lighter color pink, I'm using those same 2 colors that I used for the bow, adding a little bit of a highlight to those berries on the wreath. And then I think it's complete. So I'm going to go through those steps one more time. Make a circle, 2 lines that come up. This time I used a loop before adding the curves on the side. Fill the whole thing in. Don't forget to add the little ribbon at the bottom. Once it's painted in, grab another color if you want to and add some stripes. If you don't want stripes, outline the bow at least so that it has a little bit more contrast, because mine was hard to see until I started to outline it a bit. Once the outline's complete, Leave no paint behind. Don't leave any paint left on that palette. Go ahead and use it for splattering, use it to paint more bags, or even to just start an abstract bag where you just slap different colors of paint on there. It doesn't have to be a picture of something. It could be an abstract bag because then you could use it for all sorts of different occasions, not just for the holidays. Use some paint to make those berries, and then if you want to add a little bit of a highlight or a shadow underneath, you can. All right, once your bag is complete, now it's time to explore the different options. So for me, I was like, oh, it's just a bag. It'll be perfect. But the great thing is that when you gift this to somebody, you could also share with them or gift them a picture frame because, ta-da, you can frame the work of art. All they have to do is just cut the bag to size or chop off the handle. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this easy and fun way to make personalized bags. Don't forget to sign it, of course. You being the artist, you need to make sure to sign your artwork. And I hope that you have fun because that is the main thing that I want you to do when you're painting these bags. Toodles!